Hello and welcome. My name is Louise Cord. I'm the Global Director for Social Sustainability and Inclusion at the World Bank. And I'm here today to interview and welcome Crispian Olver, who's the Executive Director of South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission. Welcome.
Morning, Louise. Thank you for the interview.
Well, thank you for coming. South Africa is one of the first countries that has launched into a just transition investment in the energy sector, with support from the World Bank to decommission and repurpose the Kamadi coal-fired power plant, and with renewables and batteries, as well as support for workers in the communities and a large component of stakeholder engagement. Several factors have contributed to the success of this project, one of which was the Presidential Climate Commission, which helped build consensus. Can you tell us a little bit about the mandate of the commission and what were some of the factors and building blocks that allowed you to put it in place?
Yes, sure, Louise. So the Presidential Climate Commission was set up just under 2 years ago. It's established by our president, and it brings stakeholders together from the different social partners that are core to the climate transition. So you've got organized business on the commission, you've got organized labor, we've got civil society, academics, science bodies, young people, faith organizations, local government, and 12 government ministers. So we bring all the core economic ministries together on the commission. And our mandate is pretty simple. We need to plot a path to net zero by around mid-century in a socially just manner that builds the economy and ensures that the transition is sustainable and financeable. Our genesis comes out of the Jobs Summit in 2018, at which all of the social partners recognized the grave threat that the climate transition poses to jobs in South Africa. We've got a very emissions-intensive economy, and because of our trade exposure, as countries start to cut their emissions and implement some form of either a carbon border tax adjustment or some other trade restrictions, Europe is doing away with the internal combustion engine, that's going to have a huge impact on core economic sectors in South Africa. So people realize that if we don't start to transition in a carefully planned manner, it poses risks to economic sectors and to jobs and to workers. So that was the spur that got the commission set up.
Wonderful. And the commission has been quite successful. A lot has been achieved in the 2 years that we have a fly. That's part of the
There's
problem.
a fly in the room.
And part of the problem of the problem. But, and a lot has been achieved in the 2 years since you've been set up. I mean, this May and June, you set out a framework on just transition for South Africa, built on a lot of analytical work, consultations, all the way down to the community level. Can you tell us a little bit more, looking back over the last 2 years, what has been some of the key lessons learned on how you've built this consensus to move forward?
Yeah. So, I would say the core ingredient has been trust. And trust is not easily come by. And the starting point of this journey, there was a lack of trust and suspicion on the part of different social partners. So, civil society thought of government as being duplicitous and basically fossil fuel lobbyists. Business were deeply suspicious of government's rent seeking. I mean, we've just come out of a period of very serious state capture in South Africa. And they'd been disappointed by government's failure to deliver on a range of core economic policies, including keeping the lights on. We've got these rolling blackouts due to a power shortage in the country. And Labour had very real concerns that, the concerns of workers in this transition were being ignored, that people were signing on to targets without thinking through the social implications. So it took quite a lot of legwork to get everyone around the table to understand that the other parties genuinely want to engage with them, and were willing to listen and move forward. And our first 2 years has really been trying to create the space for social partners to talk to each other and find each other.
That's one of our key points in our strategy as a global practice, that without social cohesion and trust, change and progress on climate change is not going to be possible. So I can see how it took time to create in South Africa and how important the role was of the PCC. Looking ahead, let's hope that South Africa is successful in raising millions, if not billions, let's hope, to address climate change. How do we know 20 or 30 years from now? How can we ensure that 20 or 30 years from now, you don't look back and say, wow, that was a missed opportunity for the poor and the most marginal? We left the further behind, and the gaps that exist today are not further widened. What can be done to avoid that?
So everyone's paying lip service to just transition now. It's the talk of the COP. Every country is now coming up with just transition programs. And I think it's great to see an idea become hegemonic, but I'm worried that it is for many just lip service. And I think that what we need to think through very carefully is not just the mitigation and the adaptation steps that we need to take. And we're all pretty clear on what those are. But we also need to take very seriously the social consequences and the economic consequences of the different policy decisions. And this is not just because it's the moral thing to do, and it obviously is. It's also because the political economy of the transition in our countries depends on making sure that we carry the core constituencies, the core partners along with us on this journey. So every transition plan has to also talk about how do we invest in the skills that we need for the transition? How do we, support workers in moving from one job to the other? What are the job placement mechanisms we need? How do we invest in diversifying local economies and building out value chains linked to the energy transition in areas? And for communities that are severely affected by the impacts of the physical impacts of climate change, how do we build their resilience to those impacts and give them a stake in the future economy?
Interesting. Let's hope we can do it. It's a big ask. And in fact, climate action, as you know well, is a big ask, with everyone worried about the finance side, the sources of energy. And yet you've been talking about the critical role of community engagement and stakeholder engagement. What advice would you give other countries trying to do communities and stakeholder engagement? How to set it up, how to make it happen, how to make it real beyond just ticking the box for consultations?
So Louise, the starting point, I think, is recognizing the value of stakeholder engagement. And I think a lot of people think about it in the traditional way. So, we've got our normal technical policy processes that get us to a plan and a decision, and we stack up the investments and we implement. And then we think about how do we clip stakeholder engagement onto that. I want to change that paradigm because this transition we all know it's complex, and we all know that it can't be done by executive or regulatory fiat. You can't command it. The transition is only possible if we mobilize the different capacities and insights and contributions that each stakeholder partner can bring to the table. So, we need business, part of this transition, making the investments, informing us about what the obstacles are that many of them are facing in getting this to move forward. We need labor to, bring the concerns of workers and their needs in the transition to the table. We need civil society with their climate ambition and their ability to champion just transition issues. We need them in the tent with us. So, once you recognize that there's a value to stakeholder engagement processes, this fly is driving me mad. Then it's so much easier to go back and re-look at the whole process that you want to run and factor it in at the right point. Start with stakeholder engagement and see what value it brings as you craft joint projects, collective action for the transition.
So it's part of the entire process. It's integrated.
It is. It's integral.
In and out.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. South Africa is a beacon for the work that you've done. It's been a keystone flagship project highlighted here at the COP, and the role of the PCC is something that's also received a lot of attention, and what we've heard today, rightfully so. Thank you for taking
thank you,
the
Louise.
time
Good to talk to you.
talk to me, and hopefully talk to millions. Thank you.